So this is the example that we've been working on for a day or so, right? That we can add any number of to-dos, but we see that if we refresh, right, everything's gone, right? So what we're going to do now is that we're going to start adding some session management, some the capabilities of actually storing this in a more persistent manner, right? At least send it over to the server. In general, we should never rely on data that is just rendered here on the client. Whenever we want to make sure about our data, we always have to consider going back to the server, which is going to be our source of truth, right? Especially if you're working with data that might be shared, right? That we might be working on pieces of information that we're collaborating together, right? That I'm working on this and you're working on the same piece of data, right? I'm inserting into a list, you're removing from the list, and the only place where this is can actually have the latest version, right? Is the server, right? We should always consider that whatever data we're rendering on the client has a potential of just being stale, right? Just having just an old version of whatever the true value of this is, right? So let's do that. Let's start working on the server side. Okay. All right. So to do that, we're going to create the server side of this little application. Okay. And to do that, we're going to put our code outside of our public directory. Remember, everything that's in the public directory is meant to be static, right? The server considers everything in here as just static code, just plain old ASCII. It's not intended for execution by the server or the server side. So we're going to create a code outside of the public directory. I'm going to put it right here under the lectures directory. I'm going to create another directory here and call it afternoon. Okay. And we'll do the server side of this application here. We'll put it under a file called app.js. Okay, and this app.js is not to be confused with this app.js. Yes, this app.js is the client side, the browser side of our application built by us, and this is the server side version, server side of the same application. Yes, this is meant to execute on the browser, right? Gets downloaded from our servers, gets downloaded to someone's browser, somewhere on the West Coast. Yes, and that browser is then coming back to us to talk to us, asking for data. Okay, it's going to come back to this app.js. Yes, this app.js running on the browser has limitations, right? It doesn't have access to the file system, doesn't have access to the database, has limited access to the network, but it has access to a view, mouse, keyboard, right, and colors and layout, and it's pretty. On the server side here, right, we don't have access to a keyboard, to a mouse, to a view, to anything, right? What we do have though is access to a file system. We have access to a database. We have access, unfeathered access to a network, right? A full-blown operating system. Yes. So first of all, let's see if we can execute this. We'll just do a simple just console log hello from app.js on the server side. Okay. And let's see if we can run this. So the way we're going to run this is from the server, from this server.js. Okay, and this is me doing this last night for the evening folks. Let's talk about that today here, right? So what we're going to do is that this app.js, we're going to load it as we would load any other JavaScript from within another JavaScript. The only thing that is executing on the server is this server.js, right? That's the entry point of our server. When Heroku looks at this, that's the server.js that gets executed. Everything else starts here. Yes? Okay. So to load other libraries, we're going to use the same mechanism we used here to load third-party libraries. Here we're loading the Express library. This one is being loaded from Node modules. If it's just a simple name, if it's a simple string, it's meant to be looked up under the Node modules. But we can load our own. We can load any other library that we want. Right? For instance, we can do a require, right? And then we can navigate to the exact location of the library that we want to load. So we're going to go down lectures, we're going to go down afternoon, and we're going to go down to app.js. Yes? Right? That's going to load that app.js. The .js is optional. Okay, it's optional. But commonly is left off. Right? It's implied that it's a JavaScript file. Okay? All right, so there it is. So if we do that and we restart the server, we'll notice that indeed the file was loaded, right? Hello from app.js on the server side. So we're there. We're inside. Now on this app.js is fundamentally different than this app.js, right? This app.js is running on a browser. It's being loaded by the browser from our server, okay? And not only the browser is loading our app.js, right? That browser is also loading Bootstrap.js and Angular.js and jQuery and tons of other libraries, yes? And so each one of those libraries potentially declaring functions and variables on the global space, right? And we saw that to deal with that problem, we're putting everything in modules, right? We're putting in those ify statements, yes? Here on the server, we don't have that problem, right? We're not competing with other libraries, right? It's just us, right? It's whatever we want to put in here. So we don't need to use the ify design pattern here on the server side. Okay. Also, the way these libraries are loaded by Node.js uses this require mechanism. And this require mechanism already has mechanisms to separate the namespaces, right? So whatever is loaded, right, whatever is inside app.js is not accessible outside of app.js. Already it declares its own namespace, right? So anything you declare inside of app.js, any variables, any functions, has a file scope, okay? It's not accessible outside of this file. So already it's inside of its own little module, all right? Right, so there's no littering. If I want to expose something that is in here, I need to do it explicitly, right? If I do declare here a function that is very useful to me, or a variable that is very useful to me, I need to explicitly make it available outside of this file. Yes, right? And it has its own mechanisms. You can expose things by using modules exports module, or I thought it was singular. Maybe it's plural. And whatever you assign to modules.exports, right, becomes available outside of the of this, right? So if you require something, whatever you pass here, maybe some message that says hello, okay, and you assign it here like my app, right? It's accessible for you, so we can do some console log my app. Right, so if we rerun this, modules, I think it's singular. Okay, there it is. It is singular. I don't know why it was offering me plural. Notice that we're printing, right? We're printing that. We're printing my app. See that? And my app comes back from the require. Yes? And it has the value of whatever I assign to module.exports. Module.exports is Node's mechanism, right, for you to be able to create your APIs, for being able to have one module, be able to talk to some other module using some very well-defined API. Yes? Right? So you can put anything you want here. You could put a function in here. Say hello. Function, and then in here console.log say hello, or hello. Okay. So from within here we can run my app dot say hello. So if I run it, Notice that there's the hello, right? This second hello is from having invoked this say hello. Yes? So it will be very common a little later throughout the semester is that you're going to be creating these APIs, right? APIs for being able to connect to your third-party APIs, APIs for being able to talk to the database, APIs for whatever modules you're building on the server side. Yes? All right? Okay. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? All right. In particular, what we're going to be doing here, right, is declaring here a function. Right, we're gonna declare here a function. So exports whatever my app is bound to is going to be bound to whatever I tell it to. This function, right? So my app will be this function, right? And I can pass arguments to that function, maybe a message, right? And in that message, we can say console log. Right, we can say message equals and whatever message you pass. Right, so here my app returns, and my app is bound to what? It's bound to that function. Yes, right. So I can call it. I can call that function and pass in a message. This is the message. Right, so if I run it. Notice that indeed message says is equal to this message. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right. Awesome. What this allows us to do is pass in arguments from the outside. See that? So somebody can pass us data from the outside. In particular, one of the things that I like to pass this my app.js is I like to pass this app over here. See that app? Right? Because that app. Remember what it allowed us to do? Remember what we did at the beginning? See that? Remember that? It allowed us to create URLs. It allowed us to create URLs that allowed us to be able to call the server from outside and ask it for data, right? Data like a JSON object. We want to do something similar. So we want that app to be able to do something like this, right? So let's pass the app over here. I'm going to pass the app, right, which is Express. And so from within here, I have the app right here. See? So from within here, I can now declare a route and say that if I get if I want to say get the to-dos, right? I like to respond with send back. Here are the to-dos. Okay, so that yes.
The get after app is the method of the request. Right?
Say again.
The get after app is the method of the request.
The get here. You mean this function?
On the second row after app, so you have app.get.
App.get. Okay. Yes.
What is get? What function?
Yes, it's a function that allows us to register a listener for an incoming GET request, right? Okay. So it allows us to say, hey, listening for this incoming request, right? If it matches this URL, I want to execute that function.
So for post, you would say app.post.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So there's app.post, app.put, app.delete, and we'll see those in a minute. Yep, very good. All right, so if I do this, right, and I rerun this, if I go back to my client, right, and now I ask here for get, what was it? Get the to-dos. Get the to-dos, right? It responds with here are the to-dos. See that? Right? Well, we have the to-dos. So we have a mechanism by which now our Angular application, which has been downloaded, it's running on the browser, it has no data, right? It has no persistent data. It only has temporary data. Yes, right? It sometimes referred to as transient data. It has data that is ephemeral, right? It can go at any time. It has to come back to the server for the real data. Yes. So what we could do is declare here an array of to-dos, right? That might have actual objects, right? With titles, to-do 1. And with a description, was it details or description? Details. Details, and this is details 1, 2, 3. So this is 1, 2, 3. So let's copy that and paste that. And this is 2, 3, 4, and 3, 4, 5. So here, what we could do is instead of sending that text, we can send back. We know it's JSON, right? We know it's JSON, and we can just send back the to-dos, right? So if I refresh, right, and I come back here and I render, notice that we have data, right? This is data coming from the server, right? The server is exposing this data. Yes. And notice the URL we chose to retrieve. But notice that before we were using this, right? Lectures, and we were doing afternoons, right? And we were doing that. So notice that sometimes this URL maps to static content, right? This is the index file, right? That's static content. Or sometimes it could map to get the to-dos, which is mapping to some not dynamic content, but dynamic data, right? This data could be dynamic, right? It could very well come from a database access, right? Some database query, okay, which will be eventually. So this could get ambiguous, right? What if under the public directory I create a directory called exactly that, get the to-dos, right? And inside here, I declare an input, an index, and say, h1, these are not the to-dos, right? If I refresh this, notice that what I get is the HTML part and not the data, right? So it could get ambiguous, right? So we need to come up with a mechanism that we can guarantee to some extent that, hey, I'm referring now to static content, and here I'm only referring to a dynamic data. Yes? Right? There is no formal way of doing this. There's only conventions, right? As you'll quickly find out, JavaScript is just full of conventions, right? We all agree that this is the way we're going to do it, okay? And I guess it's, the industry has identified best practices and what usually to do. Yes.
Is it defaulting to the HTML file because it's in the public folder, or just because it always prefers HTML?
Well, no, it's the way the routes were declared. We have the static being declared first, and then we have our route, and whatever gets declared first wins, right? So if it finds it there, it's not going to bother to keep looking. If we would have switched it, it would have worked for that particular instance. Okay. So yes, you can manipulate the order in which things win or not. Okay. But we don't want to have that mechanism. Instead, we're going to come up with a convention, and we're going to stick to it throughout the semester. And it's a very common convention in industry in general, right? That you create and you prepend a namespace and say, hey, everything that follows API, right, that is meant for dynamic content, right? API is a very, very common prefix that is used in industry. Another very, very, very common one is /rest as well, right? And it's understood by all developers that these are meant for some dynamic API. Yes? And we're going to be getting data, not content. Okay? Right? I'm going to use API. Now, if I restart the server and I come back, I still get the to-dos, but if I put the API in front of it, now it's not ambiguous anymore, and we get the data. Everybody good? All right. Another convention will be that what we're going to do is that this the syntax of this URL is not just whatever you want. Okay. It's going to follow a pattern, right? A very well-established pattern in industry, which is oftentimes referred as to RESTful APIs. Yes?
When you put the API, it's not looking in public anymore. You had multiple.
Well, it first looks in public. It doesn't find it, and then it continues with this and finds it. A directory called API,
Okay.
right? And a directory called get the to-dos.
Right, but you don't have the directory called API. So after
I don't, right?
So after that, it just looks for get the to-dos, right?
Yes.
So if you had multiple get the to-dos out of public, what would happen?
I'm sorry?
If you had multiple directories that had something that had get the to-dos out of public, so
Okay.
lectures after
Well, in public, you can't have more than, you can't have directories that have the same name, right?
no, out of public.
Okay. Oh, out of public. No, out of public, they're not checked, right? Everything would be checked only in public. Right? Static content is only out of public, right? And then any other routes you're declaring using the .get. Those are the only routes. Everything that's so under the public, it's mapped to physical files, and you can't navigate outside of the public directory. So any other routes would be declared programmatically, like we're doing here.
Is API looking in public or out of public?
It's not looking in public.
So
Right. This is we are declaring a route. We're saying if you see this route, right, then execute this function.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No. So we're gonna come to a convention. Is that the syntax for this URL is gonna follow a very distinct pattern. All right. First of all, the name of this route has to be equal to the name of the entity that you're manipulating. Okay, as if these were actual resources on a network. Right. I want the to-dos. Okay. So for instance, the entity that we're manipulating here is the to-do. Yes. If it would be users, then it would be user. If it would be movies, then it would be /movie. If it's theaters, then it would be /theaters. Whatever. Okay, you have this is another convention that's very, very common, and the understanding here is that you are getting, meaning you are reading, meaning you are retrieving. You're retrieving to do, which one to do. Since I'm not telling you which to do, then the interpretation is that you want all the to dos. Okay, again, a convention. And indeed, that's what we're doing, right? We are retrieving all the to-dos. So that's good. So if I restart this and I refresh, that doesn't map anymore. We need to use the new convention /to-do. Everybody okay? Right? Now, there's a debate whether this should be singular or should be plural. Right? And there are good arguments in both cases. Since this is a collection of things, perhaps it makes sense that this will be pluralized. I'm in the camp that this should be singular, right? Especially since in English, words are not pluralized in a standard, consistent way. So it's not always and I don't want to have to remember how you pluralize things. So it's easy to just come to the convention that says it's all singular, right? It's very common, also when you declare class names, table names, right, to use the singular instead of plural. Yes? So we're gonna standardize on singular. If instead you want to have a particular instance of a to-do, then an additional convention is that you provide some unique identifier for which instance do you want in the collection of to-dos. Yes? And in this case, we are going to be passing some index. Can't type index, right? And and notice the colon in there. That means that this is going to be a placeholder, right? It can be whatever. Somebody's going to pass me /something. It's going to be a parameter that's going to be embedded as part of the path. So it's referred to as a path parameter. It's part of the path. It's a parameter passed in the path. Make sense? Right? So we could retrieve that index. We can retrieve that index from where? Well, everything that comes from the client, everything that comes from the browser, the URL, parameters, cookies, headers, body, anything that comes from the browser is all encoded in the request. Right? The request encodes and parses everything that comes from the browser. So we can retrieve that parameter from an attribute or property in there called params. Params. Right? The params allows you to retrieve values from here, right? And it's a map, right? It's a map that you can pass it the name of the parameter that you want to retrieve. Everybody okay? Right? You can have any number of parameters. You can have /index and then something else and then something else and something else, and then they're all created inside of this map. Everybody okay? Yes? So we have that index. So in this case, we want to use that index as an index into the array and retrieve that one to-do. Yes? Right? So if we restart and go back to here, this is still all the to-dos, or you want the particular one. So you want the first one, or you want the second one, or you want the third one. Comes back as a particular, I think I went too far. 2. There we go. Everybody okay? All right. We'll come back to this. We'll come back to this notation. This notation is a little more involved. In particular, if you have objects or classes that are related to one another, right? So, for instance, you might have a user creates a playlist. Yes, and so there's a one-to-many relationship between a user and a playlist. Yes, and then a playlist can contain many songs, right? So there's a one-to-many between playlists and songs, correct? So you want to be able to traverse, right, this data space, right, of starting at a particular user, then navigate to a particular playlist, then navigate to a particular song. Yes. So this notation we'll see a little later allows you can use the hierarchy, the slashes, right, to map, right, a mechanisms to navigate the hierarchy, right, where you have parent, child, parent, child, parent, child, and navigate to a particular element in the data space. We'll come back a little later. Right now we just have this flat list of to-dos. Yes? No hierarchies. All right, so we have the gets. We can now go back. Now that we have this, we can go back to our app.js, our controller. We can go back to our controller and refactor this, rewrite this. Okay. What we could do is that notice that in this to-dos, instead of this being empty, right? What we could do is go back to the server and say, hey, the server has the list of all these to-dos, right? Let's go fetch it from there, right? So let's move this a little down, right? And say that I want to go to the server and retrieve these to-dos because the server has them, right? So to do that, we're going to need another magical object, right? This is one of the first services we're looking at, right? These are services called services provided by the Angular framework. We'll later learn how to create our own services, right? But this particular service is a service that provides a mechanism to interact with HTTP resources, right? The scope allows you to interact with DOM, right? Whereas the HTTP allows you to interact with any HTTP source. Okay. In particular, we like to be able to go and generate this URL. This is the URL we want to generate. API to do. Yes. All right. So let's do that. We want to generate an HTTP. We want to generate a GET request, right? And go out to that URL. Now, this URL, I only need to use the relative path. I don't need for it to be absolute because this index page, right, this controller was downloaded from the same place where my API lives, right? So if I don't say anything, if I don't explicitly say what server, it's understood that it's the same server where I came from. Yes? A little later, we'll see that if we want to talk to other services, maybe go out to Yelp or IMDb or any other services out there, right? Then you have to explicitly say, http:// Yelp dot something 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 something, and that has its own challenges, right? And we'll talk about that a little later. Okay. So we're going back to our application, our service. So let's do that. Let's do that. So if we navigate back to lectures, what was it? No, that's not evening. We're doing afternoon. Afternoon. There it is. Okay. If we look at the network, notice that unfortunately that didn't seem to work. Right? Notice that it looks like we went out to the network. We did go out to the network. See that? There's the API call, and that is the API. So Angular did generate the query. The server said it was okay, and notice that indeed it did respond with an array. Yes, it did respond with the array. So what happened? What happened? We can even step through this in the sources. We can look at the app.js and see we could breakpoint on the call right here. We can put a breakpoint, right, and refresh. So we're hitting that point, right? This get right here, and we're going to step through this. Let's go onto the next line. It did go out, right? But it doesn't seem to have hit. Oh, actually, we don't have anything afterwards, though, do we? Let's do a console. Actually, let's do a console right here. We're going to say console log and print this out, right? And just let's put another breakpoint here. If we hover over the to-dos actually has something in it. Right? But not the array, right? Not the array that we were expecting. Okay. If we continue and we go to the console, it's some weird object that it's not what we're expecting. Okay. What is actually coming back is what it's referred to as a promise. A promise. Right, let me talk about that a little bit. The problem that's happening here is that this application, this JavaScript, right, is running on a browser halfway on the other side of the country, right, trying to communicate with a server that is, again, running halfway across the world. Right, they're not running on the same machine. Well, they are here on my machine, yes, but in real life, these are not going to be co-located, correct? Right, so you have inter-process communication. You have two machines talking to one another, and the only way for them to talk to one another is through HTTP, right, through some network. And we can expect latencies, right? It could be that this might take a few milliseconds, seconds, or maybe forever. Maybe the server crash, right? And so this has to use. It can't use synchronous communication. It needs to be asynchronous communication, right? We cannot risk the single JavaScript thread that we have, right? We can't risk it waiting for this to come back, for the server to come back, right? So instead, what this is using is a technique called Ajax, right, which is asynchronous communication, JavaScript XML communication, that relies on the browser and says, hey, browser, I'm a lonely thread, right? I don't know how to do multi-threading, right? But you, browser, do know how to do that, right? You do that all the time. Yeah, you download images and files all the time, right? You can do that. Hey, you do that. You take into account this browser, this request. You handle this request, right? You go do it, right? And then I'm going to just keep going, right? Handle because I'm very busy, and just notify me, right, when the server responds. Yes, right? So instead, right? Instead, what we need to do is register here a function, a callback function that the browser can call us back and say, here, the server responded, here's a response from the server. Okay? All right, so let's do that. The mechanism is that this get returns what is referred to as a promise to get back to you at some later time. Right? At some point, we're going to get back to you, register with me a function, a callback, where I can call you back. Okay? Right? So let's do that. To do that, the function to register for a callback is called then. Right? And in here we can provide a function. And here's the response that's going to come back from the server. Right? And we can print it out. Response. Right? So let's do that. Now let's refresh. Right? We have the breakpoint. If we look at the response and you hover over it, what we have is a status from the server saying it was okay. The response was okay. Any header information, any cookies, anything like that that comes back from the server. And here's the actual data. There it is. That's the data. That's where our array is of to-dos. See that? Right? So the only thing left to do, right, is to unwrap this response. The data is inside of the response.data, right? And now we can assign the $ scope dot to-dos equal to response.data, right? So let's try that. They are. Those are the to-dos. See that? Those are the to-dos coming from the server. Everybody okay? All right, awesome. So same thing for retrieving one, right? In this case, if I click on this, it's retrieving it from the client, right? It's retrieving it from the client. It's not going out to the server, right? And this might be controversial, right? Of whether should I trust the data that I have here on the client, right? Or should I go back to the server, right? Does this to-do actually exist already? Maybe it's in a different state. Maybe it's a to-do list that I'm sharing with my wife, and she checked it off and says, no, I'm done. It's done. I already picked up the milk. Okay, so maybe the to-do is no longer there, right? So it could be that I'm always looking at it stale. So you have to take into account those kinds of things, right? Let's do another one. How about delete? Right? If I remove, right, and I refresh, I haven't actually removed anything, right? To delete, I actually have to go back to the server to delete these things, right? So let's do that. In the remove, right? Instead of removing this from and splicing it out locally, right? We're gonna go out to the server to remove these things. So we're gonna go HTTP $delete, right? And we're gonna send a URL API. Then we're gonna do the entity that we're manipulating, and we're gonna specify the index of the entity that we were manipulating. Yes, right. So if we try to do that, and we click on this, notice that we get an error, right? And if we look at the error, is that the delete went out, right? It went out to the server, but the server is responding with, I don't know what the route is, right? I haven't been configured to respond to a delete on that route. Okay, so we need to go back to the server, and you'll find yourself doing this quite a bit when you start working on the assignments. You're going to create a delete answering for that incoming request, right? This to-do, the to-do with the index and this function with request and response. I don't know about you, but this syntax of embedding functions instead of function calls, I come from Java, and this syntax is jarring to me. Makes it I think it's very hard to read. I'm going to change it a little bit. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all these functions. I'm going to move all these functions and put them down here, right? And this is, I'm going to call this function maybe find to do by index, right? And I'm just going to put it there. Right? I find that much easier to read. Same thing with this function. I'm going to remove this function. Right? I'm going to put it in here and function find all to-dos and put it in there. Oh, wait. Right, and this is request response, and this is find all to-dos. And same thing with this to-do over here. I'm going to remove that function. I'm going to call it delete to-do. And I'm going to put it right here, function. There it is. And I'll call it delete to-do. I think this is much easier to read. Do you agree? Right? There you go. And I'll put this down here. Everybody okay? Yes? Right, it's the same exact thing. I just moved the code around. It's a little bit easier to read. So in the delete, it's actually we're going to do the same thing we were doing in the client, right? We're going to just splice out. We're going to splice it out. We're going to say the to-dos, splice it out from our model on the server side, and then we're going to respond. We could respond to a couple of things. One of the things we could respond is that we can send back all the to-dos that survived, right? The remaining to-dos, yes, right? And then on the client, what we could do is the delete again is going to receive a promise. It doesn't actually get the list of the to-dos, right? we need to register a callback, and here's the response that comes back from the server, and all the to-dos are in the data, right? So to-dos is equal in the response.data. Yes? Right? So that if we re-render this and we try to remove, it still now doesn't work. Wait, what? Oh, maybe did I restart the server? Maybe I didn't restart the server. Let me try that again. So let's see. Remove. Ah! Even worse. 500. Oh my goodness. Do I have index? Oh, right. Thank you. I don't have an index. So yeah, let's grab that from the request. Params index. I hate computers. They always take everything so literally. They always do exactly what they're told. So yeah, so I'm going to splice it out, and I'm going to refresh and click on this. There we go. So now we're removing. We are removing, and if I refresh the page, notice that indeed I just only have that one. Yes?
Just something I noticed when you were using the params there,
Yeah.
or you did it like as an array index with a string in it, and this time you did it as like a field.
Yeah, good catch. Yep, exactly. Notice that here I used the square bracket notation, right? And in here I use kind of like a dot notation, right? And in JavaScript, maps, right, can be treated as objects, right? Object notation, and vice versa. Objects can be treated as maps. Maps can be treated as objects, and you can interchangeably use square brackets or dot. This dot notation is prettier. Right? It's prettier, but this one is more powerful. It's more powerful because this is a string, right? So, and it could be a variable, right? It could be I can dynamically somehow calculate what attribute I want to manipulate. I could actually create new attributes on the fly. That's another pretty powerful but disturbing feature of JavaScript, right? That you can on the fly generate properties, right? And extend objects and remove property, which is pretty cool. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Notice that this re-rendering of the response, right? What we could do is we're doing it in two different places, right? We're doing it here, and we're doing it here, right? So we could generalize and put that in a function, something like function, find all to-dos, right? And so we could put this in here, right? Put that in here, so that now the remove, instead of putting this then and doing this whole thing over here, we can just use that function, right? Find all to-dos, right? So it's going to call this find all to-dos, which fetches, right, these to-dos and then binds it to the scope. Yes, right. But now notice that this was going to be the default thing to do, the very first thing that we did. So we need to call this. We need to call this explicitly the very first time, right? When we load the controller. So let's see if we do that. Notice that we're still there. Notice that we only still have just one to do because let's restart the server so that we get back all our to dos. There we are. And if I remove them, that still works, right? That still works. If you have code that has to execute the very first time when the controller loads, a good practice is to mark it or put it, encapsulate it in an init function. There's nothing special about this init function. It's just that it's an explicit way for you to let everybody else know that this is the code that needs to execute when the controller first starts. Okay, so you make it very explicit for anybody who's reading your code that that code, right, is what should run when your controller first starts, right? So if we refresh, it works the same way. Everybody okay? All right, I'm going to leave it here. Any questions? Again, the TAs are going to be available all day today and tomorrow to help you with any lingering issues you might have with the servers. So please go and use them. Thank you.